Cheers, guys. Epix911, welcome to the Elitist Geek. I've had quite a few questions about Sony's VR solution. And I know I touched on it briefly in the videos in the past couple of days, but I thought I'd talk about it a little bit more and speak about it in terms of the facts. What do we know about Sony's VR? The most obvious thing is that it looks freaking cool. From an aesthetic point of view, I think you'd be hard-pressed to get an argument that it isn't probably, the sexiest solution of all of them. Gear VR, Rift, Vive, Sony PlayStation, hands down, it's the sexiest kit, right? But what else do we know about it? And this is where I think it's so important to always separate fact from fiction, because a lot of times on the interwebs, all that stuff gets thrown together and we lose the truth and we start, getting powered purely on hype, right? Like I try to keep it real with the Rift and the Vive, I think we need to do the same thing. So let's delve into it a bit more, all right? So we already know it's going to launch with about 29 games. We know that a couple of those 29 games, Adrift and Eve Valkyrie, we've already seen on the PC, right? And arguably, we'll get into that, a better experience on the PC. Well, let's dig a little deeper. So that's launch in October, and then they claim 50 titles by year end. And if you think about it, that's not difficult to achieve, right? The Rift and the Vive have pretty much done that as well, but you got to look at those experiences they're lumping in there. And one of the things I said at the beginning was how much of a tech demo experience these early games are feeling like, right? A lot of them aren't complete games. For sure there are. And we're seeing that, I had a viewer point me in the direction of DCS for digital combat simulators. You've got Elite, you've got Project Cars. You definitely have some full, maybe not quite AAA, but up there titles. And then you got a lot of stuff that comes across like indie and tech demo-ish, right? Like Project Lab, the work ones that all came bundled. That's all part of the launch tally. But really, what kind of an experience is it? Portal VR, same thing. That was probably an 18-minute game, 20 minutes max, and that's being polite. And then the rest of it was a tech demo and an elevator ride, right? So back to the PlayStation. Looks great. Resolution, we know it's less, right? So we've got 1080 by 1200 per eye on the Rift and the Vive. That's dropping to 960 by 1080 per eye. And it's also got a smaller field of view, about 10 degrees. So that's how much you kind of see in the peripheral, right? One thing that the Vive is really good at is that field of view, but consequently, you could also argue it's responsible for some of the God ray effects on both the Vive and the Rift in games like Elite Dangerous. Now, where this is important to state this is they're making a lot of claims that if you look at it at the surface, you think, okay, wow, Sony's got 90, look at their refresh rate. They've got this nailed, 90 hertz, right? 120, different figures were getting thrown around. We know that they're aiming for 90 frames per second. That's the sweet spot for VR, right? That's the no nausea or very limited nausea motion sickness zone. What they're not telling you completely up front, if you dig, you can find it, they're only able to render about 45 frames. And think about it, that makes sense. How many current PlayStation games do you know that run at 60 frames per second? There's hardly any. If they do run at 60 frames per second, there's limited graphics being displayed, right? To get that 60 frames. You're not getting GTA 5 with all the eye candy you get on a PC, nor should you, because we're talking about an older, bundled in video card, right? But there's no way, and sorry, not 60, there's no way, what I meant is you're not going to pull off 90 frames per second when you can barely do 60, right? And Xbox is a whole other argument because, it's even less there, and they're kind of using like 960p resolution for a lot of games. But anyways, back to Sony. So you've got 90 frames per second, but how they're doing that, they're really only rendering 45. They're going to fill in an extra frame. And if this sounds familiar to some of you, Yes, you're correct. That's exactly what it is. It's essentially what we have on the PC and known as reprojection. That's what Sony's going to use to maintain the fluidity of a 90 frame per second, experience. But really, they're only rendering 45 frames per second. And while reprojection helps, you're still looking at an experience that won't be as fluid as true 90 frames per second, right? That's something that the PC can deliver. So it looks good aesthetically, but let's be real about what it can do. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about is Project Scorpio and the PlayStation with regards to 4K, because that gets thrown around all the time as well. Where we need to be clear on that is the 4K they're talking about is video, not gaming. Sony's already pulled back and they've said, look, no, it's not going to be 4K gaming. Xbox, you got to realize why they're being cautious. Every time they've said something in the last 2 years, they've essentially put their foot in their mouth, right? They screwed up marketing last year or 2 years ago with the whole digital debacle. They don't want to repeat, so they're purposely being a little shy. But this is not 4K gaming, folks. This is 4K video. And what do we know about 4K video? Quite a few things. We know Blu-ray doesn't even have a standard. There's a resolution right now for HDMI 1.4, which is the highest HDMI that we have out there. That is 3840 by 2160, which is 4K, but at only 24 frames, right? So to get the higher frame rate likely would require a whole new interface, HDMI 2.0. So we got to keep that in mind, that there are no standards, and how much content do we actually know that runs reliably at 60 frames per second at 4K. Unless you have a 1080 or a really fast AMD card, not much. Because 4K gaming, you crank up the options, you kill that 60 frames per second. You've also got the hardware expenses of the TV sets. So it's easy to throw around a concept like 4K, but let's be real, right? And then you've got North American, data caps for most of us for our internet connections. I've got 750 gigs a month, and I honestly have to throttle back about 2 weeks into every month, or I'd hit my 750 gigs. That's between Netflix streaming, which, speaking of Netflix, is another thing that, they don't have a lot of 4K content either. They've got some, but nowhere near what they have in regular HD. And that hardware is still very expensive. Trying to get a 4K monitor for your desktop or your TV, we have one in the house, it's a 50-inch. It costs more than the 70-inch 1080p that we have. So anyways, I just wanted to throw this out there just to kind of piggyback on yesterday's video and the video before, just to kind of, throw some fact and fiction at it. So yes, Project Morpheus, or PlayStation VR as it's now known, is going to be an excellent entry-level solution. It's going to hopefully help virtual reality as a competitor by bringing more people in. But is it going to blow away the Rift and the Vive experience? I would argue no, especially for those of us who have the hardware that's really meant to power this thing, right? And you got to think by October, that's all getting cheaper. So I think we'll continually see the PC, a full march ahead of the PlayStation, especially as we do the march to 4K VR. As always, guys, thanks for listening. Till next video, cheers.